Welcome. Tonight, we step into a cold Warsaw apartment in the late 19th century, where winter presses against thin windows and the sound of carriage wheels fades into narrow streets. The city feels watchful, regulated, and tired, a place where rules arrive from far away and settle heavily on daily life. Most people wouldn't last a week under this quiet pressure, where even education feels rationed and curiosity must learn to whisper. This is a world where knowledge is precious but restricted, and where a young girl learns early that learning itself can be an act of patience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and local time in the comments, wherever this story happens to meet you tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Maria Skłodowska is born in 1867 into a Poland that does not officially exist on maps. Warsaw sits under Russian control, its language monitored, its schools reshaped to serve an empire that is not her own. Her family lives in modest circumstances, surrounded by books, chalk dust, and the faint smell of chemicals from teaching tools. Her father teaches physics and mathematics, a well-known historical fact that later feels almost prophetic, though at the time it only means long hours, low pay, and cupboards filled with instruments that sometimes disappear when officials inspect the home. Her mother, a headmistress, carries herself with quiet discipline, but illness shadows her presence. Tuberculosis moves slowly through the household, and when Maria is still young, her mother dies. The loss settles deeply, not with drama, but with a lasting stillness. Maria learns early how silence can stretch, how grief can become a background condition rather than a single moment. Historians still argue whether this early exposure to loss directly forged her emotional endurance, or whether it simply taught her to endure without complaint. School becomes both refuge and frustration. Maria excels often at the top of her class, absorbing facts quickly, memorizing patterns, solving problems with ease. Yet she understands, even as a child, that her brilliance has limits imposed from the outside. Women are not allowed to attend the university. The path forward is blocked not by ability, but by policy. This quiet injustice does not erupt into anger. Instead, it folds inward, becoming a steady pressure that pushes her toward alternatives. One of those alternatives is the so-called flying university, an underground network of classes held in private apartments, always shifting locations to avoid detection. It is a little-known detail that Maria attends these secret lectures, carrying notebooks discreetly, knowing that discovery could bring consequences not just for students, but for teachers as well. There is something almost cinematic about it, yet for her it is simply practical. Knowledge, she learns, sometimes needs to move quietly to survive. Money is always tight. The Skłodowski family once belonged to the educated middle class, but political punishment and low salaries erode their stability. Maria understands early that wanting something is not the same as affording it. She shares rooms, reuses clothing, and studies by dim light. At times, she wraps herself in all the clothes she owns to keep warm while reading late into the night. It is not romantic hardship, just ordinary discomfort stretched over years. As a teenager, she makes a practical decision that will shape the next chapter of her life. She agrees to work as a governess, sending much of her earnings to support her older sister Bronisława, who dreams of studying medicine in Paris. The arrangement is simple. Maria will work now, Bronia will study first, and someday they will reverse roles. It is an act of long-term thinking that requires patience and trust. During these years, Maria lives in rural estates, teaching children, managing loneliness, and continuing her own studies whenever time allows. There is a quirky detail from this period that often surprises people. Despite her seriousness, Maria once falls quietly in love with the son of the family she works for. The affection is mutual, but the class divide is immovable. The relationship ends not with confrontation, but with resignation. She returns to her books, carrying the lesson that even emotions can be constrained by social structure. Through all of this, science remains a constant presence. Her father's old instruments, though outdated, become tools for private experiments. She revisits physics, textbooks, practices, mathematics, problems, and holds on to the idea that learning is cumulative, that no effort is wasted. Historians still argue whether her early self-directed study was more important than formal education in shaping her scientific instincts, or whether it simply prepared her to survive the intensity of what came later. By her early 20s, Maria has become accustomed to delay. Dreams are postponed, ambitions folded carefully away like letters meant to be opened later. Yet nothing about her suggests surrender. Instead, there is a steady readiness, as if she is waiting for the right door to open rather than trying to force one. That door will eventually be Paris, but for now, Warsaw remains the frame of her world. It is a city that teaches her discipline, restraint, and the value of quiet persistence. As mentioned earlier in the old manuscripts of her life, these years do not sparkle, but they matter. They teach her how to work without recognition, how to study without permission, and how to believe in a future that does not yet have a clear shape. And so, as this first section closes, Maria Skłodowska stands poised at the edge of departure, carrying not wealth or certainty, but something steadier, a mind trained to endure, a curiosity that has learned patience, and a promise made with her sister that the waiting will not be forever. When Maria finally leaves Warsaw, the journey itself feels like a quiet threshold rather than a dramatic escape. She boards the train with modest luggage, a little money saved from years of work, and an understanding that nothing about Paris will be easy. The city she is heading toward exists in her imagination as much as on maps, a place where women are allowed to sit in lecture halls, where laboratories glow late into the night, and where knowledge is pursued openly rather than in whispers. She arrives in Paris in 1891 and enrolls at the Sorbonne, adopting the French version of her name, Marie. The shift is practical, not symbolic, but it marks the beginning of a new rhythm in her life. Paris is loud, crowded, and alive with ideas. Cafes buzz with arguments about art and politics, while classrooms echo with chalk against blackboards. Yet, for Marie, the city is mostly cold rooms, long walks, and relentless study. Her living conditions are famously harsh. She rents a tiny attic room with poor insulation, where winter air slips easily through the walls. A well-known historical fact is that she often faints from hunger during this period, surviving on little more than bread, tea, and occasional fruit. At times, she is so absorbed in her studies that she forgets to eat altogether. It is not stubbornness, exactly, but a narrowing of focus. As if everything unnecessary fades when equations are placed in front of her. Classes at the Sorbonne are demanding, especially for someone catching up after years of self-study. She attends lectures in physics, mathematics, and chemistry, often seated among men who have had uninterrupted academic paths. Marie listens intently, taking precise notes, asking questions when needed, and returning to her room to review everything again late into the night. Historians still argue whether her initial struggles were due more to language barriers and malnutrition, or to the sheer intensity of the curriculum itself. Despite the difficulty, she thrives intellectually. In 1893, She earns first place in the physics degree program, an extraordinary achievement for a woman and a foreigner. A year later, she completes a mathematics degree, ranking second. These accomplishments bring recognition but not comfort. There is no sudden financial stability, no easing of daily hardship. Success, for Marie, arrives quietly and demands more effort rather than less. A quirky detail from this time reveals her practical nature. She owns only one decent dress, which she reserves for special occasions like laboratory access or formal exams. When it wears thin, she simply mends it rather than replacing it, uninterested in appearances beyond necessity. Friends later recall her as polite but distant, warm in conversation yet clearly absorbed in an inner world shaped by problems waiting to be solved. Her scientific interests begin to crystallize during these years. She is drawn to magnetism and the physical properties of materials, topics that require patience and careful measurement rather than dramatic demonstration. She takes a job studying the magnetic properties of steel for an industrial society, a position that offers modest pay and access to laboratory space. It is here, among instruments and samples, that she begins to feel less like a student and more like a scientist. Loneliness, however, remains a constant companion. Paris offers intellectual freedom, but little emotional support. Letters from home are infrequent, and money worries never fully disappear. Yet there is a sense of forward motion now, a feeling that effort accumulates rather than evaporates. As mentioned earlier in her story, Marie has learned how to wait, and here she learns how to advance, even if slowly. During this period, she reconnects with her sister Bronisława, now established as a medical student and later a doctor. Their earlier agreement is fulfilled, and Bronya offers Marie a place to stay temporarily. The shared household provides relief, but Marie soon returns to her attic, preferring independence despite the discomfort. Historians still argue whether this choice reflects emotional reserve or simply a desire for uninterrupted concentration. The Sorbonne itself becomes a second home. Long corridors, echoing lecture halls, and laboratory benches shape her days. She grows accustomed to the smell of chemicals, the weight of instruments in her hands, and the quiet satisfaction of numbers aligning correctly. Science is no longer a distant aspiration. It is a daily practice, demanding and absorbing. By the mid-1890s, Marie stands at another subtle turning point. Her education is largely complete, but her future is uncertain. Academic positions are rare, especially for women, and financial security remains fragile. Yet she has proven something to herself. She belongs in this world of inquiry. She can endure its demands, absorb its knowledge, and contribute something of her own. It is, at this moment, balanced between preparation and possibility, that her path begins to intersect with others who share her dedication. As the old notebooks of her life quietly suggest, the hunger that once kept her awake at night is slowly being replaced by a different kind of appetite. One that will soon find both companionship and direction. Marie's introduction to Pierre Curie does not arrive with romance or spectacle. It comes instead through practical necessity, the quiet search for laboratory space. In 1894, she is introduced to Pierre by a colleague who knows of her need for a place to work. Pierre is already an established physicist, known for his research on magnetism and crystals. But he is also reserved, almost shy, with a life that revolves around experiments rather than social gatherings. Their first conversations are cautious and precise. They talk about measurements, instruments, and the stubborn behavior of materials under observation. A well-known historical fact is that Pierre had already discovered the piezoelectric effect with his brother Jacques, a finding that made him respected in scientific circles. Yet titles and recognition mean little in these early exchanges. What matters is a shared seriousness, a mutual respect for careful work. Marie is struck by the simplicity of Pierre's life. He owns little, lives modestly, and appears indifferent to conventional success. There is a quirky detail often noted by those who knew him. Pierre prefers long walks and absent-minded reflection to formal dinners, sometimes forgetting appointments entirely when lost in thought. This quiet eccentricity feels familiar to Marie. It mirrors her own ability to disappear into work, to let hours pass unnoticed. Their partnership develops gradually, shaped more by collaboration than courtship. They discuss research methods, compare notes, and challenge each other's assumptions. Marie initially hesitates at the idea of marriage, worried that personal commitments might disrupt her scientific focus. Historians still argue whether her hesitation stemmed from fear of dependency or from a deeper concern about losing autonomy in a society that rarely allowed women both family and profession. Pierre, however, offers something unexpected. He does not ask her to step back from science. Instead, he encourages her ambitions, proposing a life built around shared inquiry. In letters, he imagines a future where they work side by side, equals in thought and effort. This vision, more than romance, draws Marie closer. They marry in 1895, marking the occasion not with ceremony but with bicycles. As a little-known detail that often delights listeners, their wedding gift to themselves is a pair of bicycles, which they use to take long countryside rides. There is no white dress, no jewelry, only practical clothing and a sense of quiet agreement. Their honeymoon consists of pedaling along rural roads, stopping when they feel tired, talking about science and the shape of ideas. Life together settles into a steady rhythm. They live frugally, often in cramped conditions, sharing a laboratory that is poorly ventilated and inadequately equipped. Marie continues her research, while Pierre balances teaching responsibilities with his own experiments. Money remains scarce, but the work feels meaningful. As mentioned earlier in her journey, Marie has learned to accept discomfort when purpose is present. Their intellectual bond deepens as Marie begins searching for a doctoral thesis topic. In 1896, she becomes intrigued by recent discoveries involving mysterious rays emitted by uranium, first observed by Henri Becquerel. Unlike many scientists who treat the phenomenon as a curiosity, Marie senses a deeper structure waiting to be understood. She proposes to study these rays systematically, measuring their intensity and behavior. Pierre soon joins her efforts, setting aside some of his own projects to support her work. This decision is significant. A well-known historical fact is that at the time, Marie is officially the doctoral candidate, and Pierre chooses to collaborate rather than lead. A rare arrangement in that era. Their laboratory conditions are harsh. They work in a converted shed with cracked floors, leaky roofs, and little heating. Rain sometimes seeps through and dust coats their equipment. There is a peculiar calm to these years, despite the difficulty. They take measurements, record results, and repeat experiments with careful patience. Marie coins the term radioactivity to describe the phenomenon she is studying, giving a name to something invisible yet powerful. Historians still argue whether this conceptual leap was more important than the physical discoveries that followed, or whether the two are inseparable. Amid their work, their family grows. In 1897, their first daughter, Irene, is born. Marie balances motherhood with research, often bringing her child into the laboratory when necessary. There is little sentimentality about this arrangement, just practicality and trust. Pierre, too, takes an active role, challenging traditional roles without comment. As their experiments progress, anomalies begin to appear. certain materials seem far more radioactive than uranium alone can explain. Marie suspects the presence of unknown elements hidden within pitchblende, or this intuition marks the beginning of a new chapter, one that will soon consume their energy and redefine their lives. For now, however, Section 3 closes with two people working side by side, bound by shared purpose rather than drama. Their marriage is not an escape from hardship, but a way to face it together, in the dim light of their laboratory, surrounded by instruments and quiet concentration. The foundations of something extraordinary are being laid, almost unnoticed. The work that leads to Marie and Pierre's most famous discoveries does not begin with sudden flashes of insight, but with monotony. Days blend into one another as Marie measures radiation emitted by sample after sample, noting tiny variations that most researchers would ignore. The laboratory remains the same drafty shed, cluttered with equipment, sacks of ore, and the persistent smell of chemicals. It is here, in these unglamorous conditions, that something quietly extraordinary begins to take shape. Marie focuses on pitchblende, a heavy, dark mineral left behind as waste from uranium mining. A well-known historical fact is that she notices this discarded material is far more radioactive than pure uranium itself. The observation is puzzling. According to existing knowledge, it should not be possible. Rather than dismissing the anomaly, she leans into it, trusting the data more than the textbooks. What follows is months of exhausting labor. Marie and Pierre process tons of pitchblende, dissolving it, boiling it, crystallizing it, and separating it again, all by hand. There are no safety protocols, no protective gloves, no warning labels. A quirky detail from this period is that Marie often stirs boiling cauldrons with an iron rod taller than herself, working outdoors in winter because the fumes are too strong for enclosed spaces. She later recalls finding the glowing samples beautiful, unaware that this faint light is slowly altering her body. In 1898, Marie announces the discovery of a new element, which she names polonium after her homeland, Poland. The choice is deliberate and political, a quiet assertion of national identity at a time when Poland remains under foreign control. Later that same year, she and Pierre identify another new element, radium. Far more radioactive and far more difficult to isolate. These discoveries immediately draw attention within scientific circles, even as the work behind them remains largely unseen. Historians still argue whether Marie fully understood the long-term dangers of radiation during this period, or whether the risks were simply unknowable given the state of science at the time. What is clear is that she and Pierre experience physical effects almost immediately. Burns appear on their hands, fatigue becomes constant. Yet they continue, driven not by ambition for fame, but by the desire to understand what they have uncovered. Their living conditions blur into their working conditions. The shed becomes a second home, and the line between day and night dissolves. Marie takes notes meticulously, documenting procedures that others might later follow. She insists on precision, even when the task seems endless. As mentioned earlier in her story, patience has become one of her defining tools. The scientific community reacts with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. Some researchers question whether polonium and radium truly exist as distinct elements, while others rush to replicate the findings. Marie remains focused, letting results speak for themselves. She is not a natural performer, uncomfortable with public attention and formal lectures. Her confidence lies in repeatable measurements, not rhetoric. In 1902, after years of work, Marie finally succeeds in isolating a measurable amount of pure radium. The achievement is monumental. A well-known historical fact is that she determines its atomic weight, confirming its status as a new element. This moment marks the culmination of relentless effort, yet it arrives quietly, without celebration. There is always more data to analyze, more refinement to pursue. Despite the significance of their discoveries, the Curies remain financially strained. They refuse to patent their methods, believing scientific knowledge should be shared freely. This decision, often overlooked, has lasting consequences. While others profit from radium's applications, Marie and Pierre continue living modestly. Historians still argue whether this choice was idealistic to a fault, or a principled stand that defined the ethics of modern science. Public fascination with radium grows. Newspapers describe its mysterious glow and potential medical uses, often exaggerating its benefits. Marie watches this attention with caution. She understands that excitement can outpace understanding, and that the substance they have revealed carries both promise and uncertainty. As this section draws to a close, the shed that once seemed temporary has become a landmark of discovery. Within its cracked walls, Marie has reshaped how matter itself is understood. The hidden work is no longer hidden, but its cost, both physical and emotional, is only beginning to surface, setting the stage for a new and more complicated chapter. Recognition arrives for Marie Curie, not as a sudden transformation, but as a slow accumulation of attention that feels almost mismatched with her daily life. In 1903, the Nobel Prize in Physics is awarded jointly to Henri Becquerel and to Marie and Pierre Curie for their research on radiation. A well-known historical fact is that Marie becomes the first woman to receive a Nobel Prize, a milestone that quietly reshapes expectations, even if it does not immediately change her circumstances. At first, her name is nearly left off the nomination. It is Pierre who insists that her contribution be formally acknowledged. This intervention matters deeply, not only for historical record, but for Marie herself. Historians still argue whether the omission was a simple oversight rooted in tradition, or a reflection of the deeper resistance to recognizing women as equal partners in scientific discovery. The prize brings prestige, but not ease. The money helps stabilize their finances, yet daily routines remain much the same. Marie continues to work long hours, teaching, researching, and caring for her family. Fame feels intrusive rather than flattering. Journalists seek interviews, photographers crowd laboratories, and invitations arrive for lectures she does not enjoy giving. She responds politely, often briefly, preferring the clarity of data to the ambiguity of praise. A quirky detail from this period is that Marie dislikes formal clothing and struggles with the expectations placed on public figures. She once attends an official event wearing a plain black dress that she plans to use later in the laboratory. Practical to the point of indifference. Appearances, to her, are secondary to function, and function always points back to work. Pierre, however, feels the strain differently. The pressure of recognition weighs on him, and his health begins to falter. Teaching obligations increase, administrative duties pile up, and the physical effects of radiation exposure continue quietly in the background. Marie notices the fatigue, but has little space to address it. Their lives are filled with responsibility, and rest feels like an indulgence. Despite the growing fame, their laboratory conditions remain inadequate. Marie campaigns for better facilities, arguing that serious science cannot thrive in crumbling spaces. Progress is slow. Institutions admire the discoveries but hesitate to invest fully, especially when the leading figure is a woman who does not fit expected roles. Historians still argue whether institutional reluctance was driven more by budgetary constraints or by social bias, though the effects are difficult to separate. Amid all this, Marie's sense of purpose remains steady. She is less interested in what radium symbolizes and more concerned with what it can reveal. She begins to explore its medical potential, especially its ability to target diseased tissue. The idea that something invisible could heal as well as harm fascinates her, though she approaches such applications with caution. At home, life is modest and structured. Irene grows, absorbing the rhythms of a household shaped by science. Marie does not indulge in excess or sentimentality, but she is attentive in her own way, encouraging curiosity and independence. As mentioned earlier in her life, she believes knowledge is something to be earned, not handed over icily. The contrast between public image and private reality becomes increasingly sharp. Newspapers describe the Curies as luminous figures of progress, while Marie continues to worry about funding, equipment, and time. The glow attributed to radium feels metaphorical now, a brightness that draws attention while obscuring the exhaustion beneath it. By the mid-1900s, Marie stands at the center of a paradox. She is celebrated worldwide, yet still fighting for basic resources. She is praised as exceptional, yet treated as an exception rather than a standard. These contradictions do not break her focus, but they deepen her reserve. As this section closes, the Nobel Prize sits quietly in the background, less a climax than a marker along the way. The real work continues, shaped by sacrifice, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to understanding the forces she has helped reveal. The recognition is real, but so is the cost, and both will follow her into the next, more turbulent chapter. The year 1906 fractures Marie Curie's life with a suddenness that leaves no time to prepare. Pierre steps into a Paris street on a rainy afternoon and is struck by a horse-drawn carriage, dying almost instantly. A well-known historical fact is that his death is purely accidental, not connected to illness or laboratory work. Yet it reshapes everything Marie has built. Historians still argue whether her restraint reflects emotional suppression or a deliberate attempt to survive by structure. But those close to her notice the depth of the loss in quieter ways. One of the most striking details from this period is how Marie addresses Pierre in her private notebooks, writing to him as if he were still present. These entries are not sentimental, but factual, sharing daily events, decisions, and worries. It is a form of continuity, a way to keep partnership alive, even when one voice has gone silent. In the professional world, events unfold with striking speed. Within a matter of months, the Sorbonne extends an offer to Marie Pierre to assume her late husband's post, marking her as the first woman ever appointed to teach there. The moment is groundbreaking, yet inseparable from sorrow. When she enters the lecture hall, every seat is occupied, students drawn not only by the subject of radioactivity, but by the sight of the woman now standing in a place once held by a revered man. Her manner is composed, her voice unwavering. She opens the lecture at the precise point where Pierre had stopped, deliberately preserving the continuity he left behind. Her growing visibility brings scrutiny. Newspapers begin to examine her personal life with the same intensity they once reserved for her discoveries. A friendship with physicist Paul Langevin becomes public, and private letters are leaked to the press. The resulting scandal is harsh and invasive, casting Marie as an outsider, a foreign woman accused of moral impropriety. Historians still argue whether the outrage was fueled more by nationalism, sexism, or fear of an unconventional woman who did not fit any comfortable category. The pressure becomes overwhelming. She receives hostile messages, and crowds gather outside her home. At one point, she is urged to leave France temporarily for her safety. Even members of the scientific community hesitate to defend her openly. The contrast between her international reputation and her personal isolation is stark. In 1911, In the midst of this turmoil, Marie is awarded a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for the discovery of two new elements, and for isolating radium. This makes her the first person ever to receive two Nobel Prizes in different scientific fields. A well-known historical fact is that she insists on attending the ceremony in Stockholm, despite suggestions that she stay away due to the scandal. She separates her private life from her work with firm clarity, refusing to allow public judgment to redefine her scientific contributions. A quirky detail from this period reveals her stubborn sense of fairness, when advised to delay accepting the prize until controversy faded. She reportedly responded that the award had nothing to do with her personal life. To her, facts remained facts, regardless of opinion. Throughout these years, her health begins to decline subtly. Fatigue deepens, eyesight weakens, and persistent aches settle in. Yet she continues to work, directing research, mentoring students, and expanding the field she helped create. As mentioned earlier in her story, endurance has long been her quiet strength. Section 6 closes with Marie standing alone at the center of her work, carrying loss, recognition, and controversy all at once. She does not pause to resolve these tensions. Instead, she keeps moving forward, guided by discipline rather than comfort, toward a future that will soon demand a different kind of courage. When war arrives in Europe in 1914, it does not announce itself gently. Laboratories empty, classrooms quiet, and familiar routines dissolve into urgency. Marie Curie, now in her late 40s, watches as Paris shifts from intellectual hub to military center almost overnight. Many scientists leave, research pauses, and priorities reorder themselves around survival. For Marie, the question is not whether to help, but how. She quickly understands that her knowledge of radiation can serve an immediate and practical purpose. A well-known historical fact is that she helps develop mobile X-ray units to assist battlefield surgeons, allowing them to locate bullets and shrapnel inside wounded soldiers. Until then, operations often rely on guesswork, causing unnecessary suffering and fatal mistakes. Marie sees this not as innovation for prestige, but as science responding directly to human need. She designs compact radiography units mounted on vehicles, later nicknamed Little Cories. These units include X-ray machines powered by generators, darkroom equipment, and basic protective shielding, though by modern standards it is minimal. A quirky detail from this period is that Marie learns to drive and repair the vehicles herself, something unusual for a woman of her age and status at the time. She refuses to wait for assistance, preferring direct involvement. Her teenage daughter, Irene, joins her, trained carefully to operate the equipment. Together, they travel near the front lines, setting up imaging stations in makeshift hospitals. The conditions are chaotic. Wounded men arrive continuously, pain thick in the air, surgeons working under exhaustion and pressure. Marie moves calmly through these spaces, adjusting machines, explaining images, translating shadows on plates into guidance for hands holding scalpels. Historians still argue whether Marie underestimated the cumulative risks of radiation exposure during these years, or whether the urgency of war simply outweighed long-term concerns. What is certain is that safety remains secondary to speed. Protective measures are inconsistent, and Marie often handles radioactive materials directly. Her focus is fixed on the immediate benefit, not the invisible cost. Beyond the mobile units, she establishes training programs for nurses and technicians, teaching them how to operate X-ray equipment and interpret images. By the end of the war, hundreds of radiology units are in use across France, and thousands of medical workers have been trained. Marie does not seek recognition for this effort. In fact, she refuses military rank or decoration, considering the work a natural extension of her scientific responsibility. Life during the war is austere. Resources are scarce, and Marie diverts her own supply of radium to support medical imaging, locking it away for safety when Paris is threatened. She also helps fundraise internationally, traveling to promote scientific cooperation and secure support for research institutions devastated by conflict. As mentioned earlier in her life, she understands sacrifice not as drama, but as logistics. Emotionally, the war years are complex. Pierre's absence feels sharper in moments of danger, and the presence of her daughter at the front brings both pride and quiet fear. Yet Marie rarely expresses these feelings openly. Her comfort lies in action, in solving immediate problems, in turning knowledge into relief. By the time the war ends in 1918, Marie is physically exhausted. The pace she has maintained is unsustainable, yet she has altered the course of medical practice. Radiology, once a laboratory curiosity, has become an essential tool of modern medicine. Soldiers survive who would not have before, and surgeons operate with greater confidence. Section 7 closes not with celebration, but with stillness after strain. The guns fall silent, and Marie returns to a world that must rebuild. She carries with her the weight of what has been done and what has been lost, and the understanding that science, once released into the world, will always find its way into moments of greatest need. The years after the war bring neither rest nor retreat for Marie Curie. Europe rebuilds itself slowly, and scientific institutions struggle to recover from years of disruption. Marie returns to Paris carrying both authority and fatigue, aware that her work has reshaped medicine as well as physics. Yet, the infrastructure needed to continue serious research remains fragile, and resources are limited. In 1920, she accepts a position as director of the Curie Laboratory at the Radium Institute, an institution created to study radioactivity and its medical applications. A well-known historical fact is that the institute becomes one of the world's leading centers for cancer research and radiological science. For Marie, leadership is practical rather than ceremonial. She focuses on equipment, staffing, and steady progress, avoiding unnecessary publicity whenever possible. Her international reputation, however, continues to grow. Invitations arrive from across the world, especially from the United States, where enthusiasm for scientific advancement is paired with greater financial support. In 1921, Marie travels to America, welcomed by large crowds and formal ceremonies. The purpose of the trip is specific: to secure funding for a gram of radium, an amount essential for her research and far beyond her personal means. A quirky detail from this journey is Marie's visible discomfort with the attention. She dislikes speeches and finds the celebrity exhausting, yet she endures it because the outcome matters. American women organize a campaign to raise funds, and the effort succeeds. She receives the radium not as a personal gift, but as a tool for her laboratory, insisting it belonged to science rather than to her. Historians still argue whether Marie's reliance on public fundraising marked a shift in how science interacted with society, or whether it was simply a necessary response to institutional neglect. Either way, the episode highlights her pragmatism. She accepts help without vanity, redirecting admiration into concrete support. During these years, Marie's health continues to decline. Her eyesight weakens significantly, and she experiences persistent fatigue. She attributes these symptoms to overwork and age, unaware of the full extent of radiation's damage. Despite this, she remains active in research and administration, mentoring younger scientists and shaping the direction of radiological studies. One of the most meaningful developments of this period is the emergence of her daughter Irene as a scientist in her own right. Irene works at the Radium Institute, collaborating with her husband, Frederick Joliot. Marie watches this progression with quiet pride, offering guidance but allowing independence. As mentioned earlier in her life, she believes knowledge must be earned through effort, not inheritance. Inigo senses, Irene and Frederick will later receive the Nobel Prize for their discovery of artificial radioactivity, extending the scientific legacy Marie helped establish. While this recognition lies just beyond the present moment of this section, the groundwork is already visible, woven into daily laboratory life. Marie's second Nobel Prize, awarded in 1911, continues to define her unique place in history. She remains the only person at that time to have won Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. A well-known historical fact is that she refuses to see this as personal triumph, viewing it instead as evidence of a field still unfolding. Section 8 closes with Marie standing within an institution that bears her name, not as monument, but as workshop. The energy that once drove her across borders and battlefields now settles into guidance and continuity. Her influence extends beyond her own hands, shaping generations of research that will move forward even as her strength begins to fade. As the years pass quietly into the early 1930s, the invisible forces Marie Curie has spent her life studying begin to leave unmistakable traces on her own body. There is no sudden collapse, no dramatic turning point, just a gradual narrowing of energy and clarity. Tasks that once felt effortless now require pauses. Reading becomes difficult. Bright light tires her eyes. Fatigue settles in with a persistence she can no longer ignore. A well-known historical fact is that Marie's notebooks, furniture, and even personal belongings remain radioactive long after her death, evidence of the constant exposure she lived with daily. At the time, however, this danger is only partially understood. Radiation is still treated as both miracle and mystery, and Marie herself has lived too long beside it to see it as an enemy. Her hands, once steady over instruments and notes, develop small injuries that heal slowly. She experiences frequent infections and episodes of weakness. Doctors struggle to identify a single cause. Historians still argue whether Marie fully accepted that her illness was linked to radiation exposure, or whether she preferred not to dwell on a connection that could not be undone. What is clear is that she does not slow her work because of fear. There is a quietly striking detail from this period that often surprises people. Marie continues to carry small vials of radioactive material in her pockets or desk drawers, appreciating their faint glow as something almost comforting. What once appeared beautiful still does. Habit, curiosity, and familiarity blend together, making danger feel abstract. Despite declining health, she remains intellectually present. She attends meetings when able, reviews research, and advises younger scientists. Her role shifts further from direct experimentation to oversight and mentorship. She listens more than she speaks, offering concise guidance rather than lengthy explanation. As mentioned earlier in her life, she values discipline over display, substance over speed. Her international standing remains strong, but she withdraws from travel and public appearances. Fame now feels distant, irrelevant to the rhythm of her days. She prefers the controlled quiet of the institute, where routines are predictable and interruptions limited. There is comfort in continuity, in watching work progress, even when she cannot fully participate. The scientific world around her changes rapidly. New theories emerge, instruments improve, and understanding of atomic structure deepens. Marie observes these developments with interest. aware that science moves forward by building on foundations laid earlier. Historians still argue whether she felt satisfaction or distance watching the field evolve beyond her direct involvement, though her letters suggest a steady acceptance rather than regret. At home, her life remains simple. She does not accumulate wealth or possessions. Her needs are few, and she is content with familiar friends and colleagues visit. Noting her calm demeanor and understated humor, even in illness, she avoids complaint. When asked how she feels, she often redirects the conversation back to work or to others. Her eyesight deteriorates further, forcing her to rely on assistants and family members for reading and writing. This loss is particularly difficult, as reading has been one of her lifelong companions. Yet she adapts, listening carefully, committing details to memory, and trusting others to be her eyes. Adaptation, like endurance, has long been one of her strengths. By 1934, her condition worsens significantly. She is diagnosed with aplastic anemia, a serious disorder of the blood. A well-known historical fact is that this illness is now understood to be linked to prolonged radiation exposure, though at the time the connection remains uncertain. Treatment options are limited, and recovery is unlikely. She spends her final months in a sanatorium in the French Alps, surrounded by fresh air and quiet landscapes. The setting is peaceful, almost deliberately gentle, as if offering rest after decades of intensity. Marie remains mentally alert, speaking calmly with visitors, asking about research, and following developments as best she can. Historians still argue whether Marie experienced fear at the end of her life, or whether her acceptance was complete. Her writings suggest neither denial nor panic, but a measured awareness that her strength is fading. There is no dramatic reflection, no grand summation of her achievements. Her focus remains outward, on science continuing without her. Section 9 closes with Marie Curie stepping gradually out of the world she helped reshape. The forces she revealed have taken their toll, but they have also transformed medicine, physics, and understanding itself. Her body weakens, but her work endures, steady and irreversible, carrying her influence forward into a future she will not see. Marie Curie dies on July 4, 1934, in a quiet sanatorium far from the laboratories that defined her life. The mountains around her are still, their outlines softened by distance and light. A well-known historical fact is that she is later buried in the Pantheon in Paris, honored as one of France's great figures, and in 1995 her remains are moved there with full national recognition. She becomes the first woman interred on her own merits, not as someone's wife or companion, but as herself. At the time of her death, the full scope of her influence is still unfolding. Radioactivity has moved beyond curiosity into foundation. Medical imaging, cancer treatment, nuclear physics, and atomic theory all carry traces of her work. She does not live to see many of these developments reach maturity, but her role in making them possible is already secure. There is a quiet irony in how her legacy is handled. Because her papers and belongings remain radioactive, they are sealed and stored with care. Even today, researchers must wear protective equipment to examine her notebooks. Historians still argue whether this preservation adds a symbolic weight to her legacy, or whether it simply reflects the lasting physical reality of the forces she uncovered. Either way, her presence lingers in an unusual, tangible way. Her children continue her path. Irene and Frederick Joliot Curie received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1935 for their work on artificial radioactivity, extending the scientific lineage Marie helped create. It is one of the few moments when her influence becomes visible not just in ideas, but in people shaped directly by her example. Public memory of Marie Curie often simplifies her into a symbol, the first woman, the brilliant pioneer, the quiet genius. Yet, those who study her life more closely notice something steadier and more human. She is not driven by dramatic vision or rebellion, but by consistency. Day after day, she shows up, measures carefully, records honestly, and keeps going, even when recognition or comfort is absent. A quirky detail, sometimes overlooked, is her indifference to honors late in life. She accepts awards politely, but rarely displays them. To her, medals do not improve experiments, and praise does not correct errors. What matters is accuracy, patience, and openness to correction. As mentioned earlier in her life, discipline has always been her anchor. Historians still argue whether Marie Curie's greatest contribution lies in her discoveries themselves or in the ethical model she provided for scientific work. She refuses to patent radium, shares knowledge freely, and prioritizes application over profit. These choices shape how future scientists think about responsibility, even when they choose differently. Her story does not end with a single conclusion. It continues in hospitals where imaging guides treatment, in laboratories where radiation is measured safely, and in classrooms where young students learn that curiosity can coexist with humility. Marie Curie does not fit neatly into legend. She resists exaggeration. Her life is made of small rooms, long hours, careful notes, and steady resolve. As this section draws to a close, her legacy settles into place, not as a monument, but as a current, quiet, persistent, and moving forward. It carries the mark of someone who believed that understanding the world was worth patience, sacrifice, and time. Now, as the story gently loosens its grip, imagine the laboratory lights dimming one by one. The benches are cleared, notebooks closed, instruments resting at last. Outside, evening settles slowly, the kind of evening that does not demand attention. Marie Curie's life, so often lived under strain and focus, softens into memory. There is comfort in knowing that her work did not rush. It accumulated, it layered itself gently, experiment upon experiment, mistake upon correction. Nothing about her path required haste. Even discovery arrived slowly, shaped by repetition and care. This rhythm, steady and unhurried, is what remains most soothing now. Picture her final days not as an ending, but as a quiet pause. Fresh air moves through open windows. The mountains stand patient, unchanged by human effort. The body rests, while the work continues elsewhere, carried forward by others who may never know her personally, yet still benefit from her patience. Let the glow that once fascinated her fade into something softer, no longer sharp or demanding, just a calm presence, like a lamp left on in another room. Science moves on, history turns its pages, and her name becomes familiar, then comfortable, then gently distant. As you settle deeper into rest, allow this life to drift behind you, complete and unhurried. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to measure. Only the quiet satisfaction of work done honestly and a world slightly better understood because of it.